Some questions sound small when they are spoken, but they carry the weight of a whole life behind them. A tired voice asking for a moment of warmth, a quiet request made by someone who has already been turned away. Too many times, on a cold night under a wide Texas sky, a woman stepped out of the darkness and asked a rancher a simple question beside his fire. Neither of them knew that by morning, their lives would begin moving in a direction neither had planned. Ethan Cole had camped beside a shallow bend in the Brazos River, 40 miles west of Fort Worth. The grass rolled wide and empty across the land, broken only by scattered mesquite trees and the low sound of cattle shifting in the dark. 70 head rested in a loose half-circle around the camp, their breath rising in soft clouds under the cold stars. Ethan sat close to the fire with his hat pulled low. His rifle leaned against his saddle within arm's reach. The years had taught him to keep things close at night. Trust came slow to a man who had spent most of his life alone on the trail. The fire was dying down to red coals when he felt it. Not a sound exactly, more like the sense that someone was there. His hand moved to the rifle before he even turned. A shape stood just beyond the edge of the firelight. A woman. She stood still with the wind pulling softly at her dress. She did not move closer. She did not run. She simply waited where the light barely touched her face. Her dress had once been blue, but now carried the dust of many miles. The hem was frayed and torn. A small travel bag hung from her hand, like the last piece of her life that had not been lost. Ethan studied her quietly. "You lost?" he asked. Her voice came soft but steady. "No." The wind moved between them and stirred the ashes of the fire. Ethan kept the rifle resting across his knee. "Then what are you doing out here?" She hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "May I warm up by your fire?" The question sounded small against the wide, empty land. "Just until morning." She did not beg. She did not step forward. She simply waited for his answer. Ethan watched her carefully. In the West, a man learned quickly that trouble could arrive wearing many faces. But this woman looked like none of them. She looked tired. More than that, she looked like someone who had spent too many nights walking alone. And he poured coffee from the dented pot beside him into a second tin cup and set it on the ground halfway between them. "If you're bringing trouble," he said calmly, "you picked the wrong camp." "I'm not bringing trouble," she answered. She stepped slowly into the light. Up close, he saw the thinness in her face and the quiet strength in the way she held herself upright, despite the miles that had clearly worn her down. Loose strands of dark hair framed eyes that carried more story than words. She crouched near the fire, but kept her distance from him. When she picked up the cup, her hands trembled slightly from the cold. Ethan noticed something else. A pale mark circled her left ring finger, where a band had once been. "What's your name?" he asked. "Anna." He nodded once. "Well, Ethan." The cattle shifted softly in the darkness as the wind rolled over the plains. For a while, neither of them spoke. Anna held the cup with both hands long after the coffee was gone, letting the warmth seep slowly back into her fingers. Ethan did not press her with questions. A person traveling alone across ranch land at night usually carried a story they were not ready to share. But after a while, she spoke on her own. "I was supposed to be married last week," she said quietly. Ethan remained silent. She stared into the fire as if the flame, this were the only thing steady enough to look at. "My father owed money," she continued. "The man I was to marry wanted $200 to forgive the debt." Her voice stayed calm, but the words carried weight. "We couldn't pay." The fire cracked softly as a piece of wood shifted. "So the wedding ended before it started." Ethan watched the flames. "That happens," he said. Anna gave a small, tired smile. "Yes, but not usually in front of an entire town. The wind carried dust through the camp. "They said a woman without a dowry brings nothing worth keeping," she said. The words hung in the quiet air. Ethan reached forward and added another piece of mesquite to the fire. Sparks drifted upward into the dark sky. "And the town?" he asked. "The landlady told me I should leave," Anna said. "Said it would look improper if I stayed." "So you walked?" She nodded slowly. "To where?" "Anywhere that wasn't there." Silence settled again between them. Ethan studied her blistered hands resting near the fire. What they were not the hands of someone who had spent her life idle. "You ever worked cattle?" he asked after a moment. Her eyes lifted with surprise. "Yes." "Ridden much?" "I grew up on a dairy farm," she said. "I can ride." Ethan leaned back slightly. He had planned to reach the rail station in Wichita in about 3 weeks. 70 cattle meant decent money if he arrived with most of them alive. But driving a herd alone was slow work, and dangerous. He looked at Anna again. "I'm short a hand," he said finally. She watched him closely. 3 weeks to Wichita," he continued. "$1 a day and meals. You work for it. No charity." Her answer came fast. "I'll do it." Ethan nodded once. "You sleep on that side of the camp," he said, pointing across the fire. "We move at sunrise." Anna did not thank him. But when she wrapped the spare blanket around her shoulders and lay down near the edge of the firelight, she slept with a kind of quiet relief that a person only shows when they finally believe they will not be turned away again. Before dawn, Ethan woke to the smell of coffee. Anna was already awake. She had rebuilt the fire and set his blue pot over the flames. The cattle were beginning to stir as the first gray light spread across the plains. Ethan watched her quietly for a moment. She noticed him and gave a small nod. "Figured I'd start earning that $1, she said. He stood and stretched his stiff shoulders. "Good thinking." By the time the sun crested the horizon, Anna sat in the saddle of Ethan's older mare, riding the left flank of the herd just as he instructed. The cattle moved slow through the tall grass, their hooves thudding softly against the earth. Dust rose in gentle clouds around them. Anna watched carefully for any animal drifting too far from the herd. She leaned forward when a brown steer started to wander, guiding it back with calm pressure. She did not complain about the dust coating her clothes or the wind that dried her lips. By noon, her hands were already raw from the reins. She said nothing. Ethan noticed. And somewhere between the first mile and the 30th, between silence and work, and the steady rhythm of cattle moving across the plains, something small began to shift. Not trust. Not yet. But recognition. 2 people who had learned to survive alone, riding side by side under a wide and unforgiving sky. Neither of them yet understood how quickly a quiet journey across open land could begin to change the shape of a person's life. The 3rd morning on the trail was when Ethan understood that Anna was not going to quit. The sun rose slow and pale over the Texas plains, spreading thin light across miles of open grass. The herd moved steadily north, their hooves beating a quiet rhythm against the dry ground. Dust followed them like a thin cloud drifting behind their path. Anna rode the left flank just as Ethan had shown her. Her back stayed straight in the saddle, eyes sharp, as she watched every animal that tried to wander too far from the herd. By mid-morning, the wind had begun to pick up. It carried the smell of rain. Ethan felt it before he saw it. The air grew heavier, pressing down on the land. Cattle lifted their heads and shifted nervously. "Storm coming." He turned slightly in the saddle. "Keep them tight," he called. Anna nodded once and widened her ride just enough to keep the strays from drifting too far out. For a while, things held steady. Then the red steer broke. The animal lunged suddenly from the herd, running hard toward the open plains. Those new hands would have hesitated, unsure which way to cut it off. Anna did not. She leaned forward and pushed the mare into a fast run. Wind tore at the brim of her hat as she cut across the drifting dust. She did not shout. She did not panic. She simply moved ahead of the steer and turned her horse sideways across its path, guiding the animal slowly back toward the herd. Ethan watched the whole thing without speaking. But when she settled back into position, he finally said, "Good turn." It was the first praise he had given her. Anna only nodded. By afternoon, the sky had turned dark gray. Thunder rolled somewhere far off on the horizon. The cattle began to bunch closer together, their movements uneasy. Ethan rode along the front of the herd, scanning the sky. He had seen storms like this before. Sometimes they passed. Sometimes they did not. The first lightning strike split the sky without warning. A sharp crack echoed across the plains. The herd exploded into motion. 70 head of cattle running blind is not a simple noise. It is chaos. Hooves pounded the ground like thunder. Animals shoved and pushed in every direction as panic rolled through them like a wave. "Turn them!" Ethan shouted. Anna was already moving. Yet she drove her horse straight toward the edge of the running herd, leaning low in the saddle as she tried to angle the animals back together. Another flash of lightning lit the sky. The wind roared across the grass. One small calf stumbled in the middle of the stampede. Its legs tangled, and it dropped hard into the dirt. The herd surged around it like a river of muscle and horn. "Leave it!" Ethan yelled. But Anna had already seen it. She swung out of the saddle before the mare had fully stopped. Dust filled the air as cattle thundered around her. She reached the calf and grabbed hold of its front legs, pulling with everything she had. The animal was heavier than she expected. The herd pressed dangerously close. A horn brushed past her shoulder. Another steer nearly knocked her down. Still, she lifted the calf upright and pushed it forward through the moving wall of animals. Ethan forced his horse into the herd and rode hard toward her. He reached her just as another wave of cattle surged past. His hand grabbed her arm and pulled her clear. They stumbled away from the stampede together. The calf bleated weakly in her arms. Rain began to fall, hard and cold. By the time the storm settled an hour later, Ethan had managed to guide the herd into a low valley where the wind could not scatter them again. The rain left the ground thick with mud. Evening came slowly after the storm passed. Anna sat near the fire that night, with her arm wrapped tightly around her side. A dark bruise was already spreading across her shoulder where one of the cattle had clipped her. Ethan handed her a damp cloth. "Hold it there," he said. "It'll swell worse by morning." She pressed it against her shoulder without complaint. The calf she had saved lay curled beside its mother nearby, alive and quiet. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The storm had washed the sky clear, leaving the stars sharp and bright above the plains. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "Why didn't you leave town sooner?" he asked. Anna stared into the coals. "Because I thought someone might change their mind," she said softly. The wind rustled through the grass around the camp. "I kept thinking if I waited long enough, someone would see that I wasn't worthless." Ethan's gaze lifted sharply. "You believe that?" She shook her head slowly. "No. But they did." The words settled heavily between them. Ethan leaned forward and stirred the embers with a stick. "People make up stories about others," Anna continued quietly. "Once they decide who you are, they rarely change their mind." Ethan looked at her. "And what story did they make about you?" She hesitated before answering. "That I failed at being a woman." The fire crackled softly. Ethan watched her for a long moment before speaking. You rode into a stampede today, he said calmly. You saved a calf that wasn't even yours, and you've worked harder than half the men I've hired. Anna gave a small, tired smile. That doesn't change what they think. No, Ethan agreed, but it changes what I think. She looked at him then. He held her gaze without hesitation. Well, that wasn't failure today, he said. What was it? She asked quietly. Ethan answered without looking away. Courage. The word hung gently between them. Anna looked down toward the calf sleeping beside its mother. I just didn't want it to die alone, she said softly. Ethan understood that the sentence carried a deeper meaning than the animal. Later that night, they lay in their bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire. The herd breathed quietly in the darkness around them. Anna stared up at the stars. For the first time in a long while, something unfamiliar stirred inside her chest. Not shame, not fear. Possibility. Across the fire, Ethan lay awake as well. He listened to the steady sound of the cattle and the softer breathing of the woman 20 feet away. When she first stepped into the firelight 3 nights ago, yet he had only seen a tired stranger asking for warmth. Now he saw something else. Someone who had chosen to stand her ground, even when the world told her she had no place left. And somewhere between the long miles, the storm, and the quiet words beside the fire, Ethan began to realize something he had not expected. He was no longer riding this trail alone, but neither of them yet understood that the hardest part of their journey was still waiting ahead. Dawn broke soft and pale over the plains the next morning. The storm had washed the sky clean. The grass glistened with thin drops of water, and the air smelled fresh and sharp. Anna woke before Ethan. For a moment she lay still beneath the blanket, listening to the quiet sounds of the herd shifting in the early light. A calf bleated nearby. At the same small one she had carried through the stampede, its mother answered with a low sound. Alive. Anna let out a slow breath she did not realize she had been holding. She rose quietly and rebuilt the fire. Soon the smell of coffee drifted across the camp. By the time Ethan stood and stretched the stiffness from his back, she already had breakfast cooking in the small iron skillet. They did not speak about the storm or the calf, but something had changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, just steady. They rode again as the sun climbed higher. The land grew rougher the farther north they traveled. Low hills rolled across the horizon, and narrow creeks cut winding paths through the grass. Anna's shoulder still ached when she moved it, but she kept riding without complaint. Ethan noticed. By midday, he pulled the herd to a stop beside a narrow creek lined with cottonwood trees. Let them graze, he said. The cattle spread out slowly across the grass. Anna slid down from the saddle and walked toward the creek. She knelt and cupped the cold water in her hands, splashing it across her dusty face. When she stood again, Ethan was beside her. You're favoring that shoulder, he said. I'm fine. You're not. She exhaled softly. It'll pass. Ethan studied her quietly. Then he stepped closer. His rough fingers gently lifted the edge of her sleeve, revealing the deep purple bruise spreading across her shoulder. His hands were careful, work-worn hands that understood strength, but also restraint. You don't have to prove anything, he said quietly. Anna looked at him. I'm not proving anything. Then why push yourself this hard? She thought for a moment before answering. Because I'm staying. Ethan watched her closely. Why? Anna met his gaze without looking away. Because you didn't look at me like I was broken. The creek flowed steadily beside them. Ethan cleared his throat and stepped back slightly. I hired you because I needed help. I know, Anna said gently, But that's not why I'm glad I'm here. The wind moved softly through the cottonwood leaves above them. Neither spoke for a moment. Finally, Ethan turned toward the herd. We should keep moving. They rode again through the afternoon sun. 2 days later, the rail station at Wichita appeared on the horizon. Smoke drifted into the sky from the waiting locomotive. The smell of coal and livestock filled the air as ranchers and drovers guided their cattle into the wooden pens. Anna helped drive the herd inside the fencing. Ethan counted them carefully. 69. One steer had vanished somewhere along the trail after the storm. Still a good drive. Buyers arrived not long after. Voices rose and fell as prices were argued across the dusty yard. Ethan stood calm and steady until the deal was finished. When the money changed hands, he counted it twice before slipping most of it into his coat pocket. Then he separated a smaller stack of bills. He walked over and held them out to Anna. 3 weeks, he said. Well, you earned every dollar. Anna looked at the money resting in his hand. It felt heavy when she took it. He nodded toward the rail line. There's a train leaving east tonight, he said. You could start fresh somewhere. Anna looked at the rails stretching far across the land. Beyond them waited towns that did not know her name. Places where no one knew about the wedding that never happened. A new life. No whispers. No judgment. She slowly folded the money in her hand. Then she stepped closer and pressed half of it back into Ethan's palm. I'll take this much, she said. He frowned. You earned it all. I know. Then keep it. The rest buys feed for your cattle. Ethan shook his head slightly. That's not necessary. Anna smiled faintly. I want to. For a moment, neither spoke. And then Ethan asked the question that had been waiting quietly between them. What will you do now? Anna looked once more at the train tracks. Then she turned back toward him. You asked me something the night we met, she said softly. He waited. You asked what I was doing out there alone. Ethan nodded. Anna lifted her chin slightly. I didn't know the answer then. And now? She met his eyes. I was looking for a place where someone would let me stay. The noise of the rail yard faded behind them. The world seemed smaller somehow. Ethan's voice came quiet. You found it? Anna stepped a little closer. Yes. The wind lifted strands of her hair across her face. I don't have a dowry, she said. I don't have a family waiting for me. I don't have a town that wants me back. Ethan held her gaze. Well, what do you have? Anna looked down at her hands. They were rough now, marked by rope burns and miles of riding. Then she looked up again. I have work in these hands, she said. I have grit enough to ride through storms. The wind carried the distant whistle of the train. And I have a choice. Ethan's expression softened. And what do you choose? Anna answered without hesitation. I choose to stay. The words were simple, but they were steady. Not desperate. Not pleading. Chosen. For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. Then he stepped forward. His hand reached for hers slowly, almost carefully. Her fingers were rough from the trail. His were scarred from years of ranch work. They fit together easily. My ranch is 2 days south of here, he said quietly. Small place. Needs fixing. Needs someone who won't quit. Anna smiled. Good thing I don't quit. A hint of a smile touched Ethan's face. Separate cabin, he added quickly. Proper. Anna laughed softly. I trust you. The train whistle echoed again across the rail yard. People moved around them, but neither stepped away. For the first time in many years, Ethan felt something inside his chest that had nothing to do with loss. Hope. They rode out of Wichita as the sun began to set. two horses moving side by side across the open plains. The sky burned deep orange behind them. Anna did not look back at the town. Ethan did not rush ahead. They rode evenly together. After a while, Anna spoke quietly. "Thank you." Ethan glanced toward her. "For what?" "For letting me warm up by your fire that night." Ethan shook his head gently. "You didn't ask for warmth," he said. "You asked if you could stay." The last light of the day stretched across the land as the two riders continued south toward open country. And for the first time in a long time, neither of them felt alone beneath the wide western sky.